Salutations everyone. In today's video, we're going to cover one of the more obscure stories and characters, not from Shadowlands, but rather from Mists of Pandaria. This is a free story on World of Warcraft's site that you yourself should read if you haven't already, as it is one of my favorites, and I can totally recommend it. This story is centered around a Dragonmaw Orc known as Koak, and what kind of orc he became in his time in Pandaria, after encountering a Cloud Serpent. The Horde was at this time sending its troops over to the New World and New Continent of Pandaria. Its resources and people would be valuable to Garrosh Hellscream, who intended to paint it all red and claim it for the Horde. In doing so, he would send his best veterans, ships, gunships, and zeppelins over towards this continent. Aboard this zeppelin was Koak of the Dragonmaw clan, a clan well known for its domination in many beasts and particularly dragons. Koak, while arriving aboard one of these zeppelins, dreamt of falling, and as he fell, dragons flooded around him in a storm of rage and fury. Shouting as he fell, Koak demanded that the dragons obeyed him.
Obey now, Gore! Submit!
Which all the dragons roared in unison. No. As Koak fell, he caught a glimpse of Grimbatol, a place he had once called home as a child. A voice shouted his name, but he continued to fall closer and closer to the ground, until finally he would crash into it. Koak! The voice screamed again, and suddenly Koak found himself back aboard the Zeppelin. No dragons in sight. Explosions ringed at his ears, witnessing now the chaos of the goblin vessel balled in fire as his fellow crewmates fought to keep the ship afloat. Suddenly, the Zeppelin screamed, further with explosions, and the metals that held it all together squealed as if the ship itself was in pain. The Zeppelin was about to crash. Koak, try as he might, attempted to find anything to get hold of, but was too late and found himself thrown by an explosion into the hungry sea. The last thing Koak heard before he fell was the cries for aid from the captain. Koak awoke as rain befell him on the shores. His leg throbbed in pain as it has taken the brunt of it when the current smashed him against the rocks. He laid broken and bleeding on the sand, wondering now if this is what Hellscream had in mind by painting the continent red. He was on a small island in this new land. All around him lay the broken pieces of the Zeppelin, entrenched in either flames or water, along with the charred corpses of his former crewmates.
For the Horde,
Koak thought bitterly. Once, those words actually meant something to him. Koak made a makeshift crutch for his injured leg and went on to search for any of the ship's survivors. Suddenly, he found himself in the presence of a massive, monstrous Cloud Serpent, her scarlet scales shining with her blood. The serpent was enormous and easily could kill him with either her claws or her serpentine body, but it made no move to do so. Koak realized then that the beast was dying, noting the twisted metal and scorched wood that surrounded the nest.
We did this,
Koak thought, and suddenly he felt sick. Slowly the serpent uncoiled herself, showing the orc a single egg the size of his chest, pristine and undamaged. The serpent coddled it gently, her tenderness at odds with her ferocious appearance. She could have escaped her current fate, but instead chose to stay and protect her soul child, her soul egg. This filled Koak with anger.
You sacrificed yourself in vain. Your whelp will still die, abandoned and alone.
Koak grimaced as another bolt of pain shot mercilessly through his leg. Blood was flowing from it like a river.
and I will likely die with it.
Koak thought. The serpent raised her tail and wrapped it around Koak's wrist, insistently pulling him toward her nest. She then nudged him from behind, and he found himself before her egg.
No.
Koak protested, but he was unable to look away from it. He stretched his hand out to the egg. Koak felt as the egg slowly but surely hatched before him. From this rose the Cloud Serpent hatchling with ruby scales just like its mother, and eyes of sapphire. Koak reached his hand out to this newborn and suddenly felt it bite it. He did not flinch, bearing the pain until the young serpent was at ease and wrapped itself around his arm. The mother watched them both. Her gaze was one of pure sorrow. Her eyes were on Koak before finally closing, and then she would collapse. The young hatchling saw this and gave out cries of anguish, nuzzling its deceased mother. Days would pass, and Koak struggled to keep both himself and the young hatchling alive, surviving off of the rain and fish within the region, suspecting a rescue party would not be sent by Hellscream, as the life of one orc was no concern to him, no more than the life of one dragon would have been for a Dragonmaw. He was on his own. On the 5th day, the rain stopped, and with that, Koak's own hopes for survival dwindled into dust. The Cloud Serpent sat there with him, shivering in the cold. But within the skies above them, the two witnessed a pair of fully grown Cloud Serpents, with their own riders accompanying them, giving Koak the idea to bring the young serpent to the Order of the Cloud Serpent. While both the Horde and Koak had only recently arrived on the shores of Pandaria, Koak had already heard much about the Order of the Cloud Serpent. Mighty warriors who rode on the backs of ferocious beasts. Koak harbored a secret desire to meet them, to witness their power and stack it against the Dragonmaw. Koak himself actually knew very little on his clan, though. He was only a child when the Red Dragonflight had destroyed Grim Patrol, and was one of the few too weak to evade capture by the Alliance, when the rest of his clan escaped into the Twilight Highlands. What he knew of his clan he had learned within his time in the internment camps by veterans of the Second War, as well as the dreams that plagued his restless nights. He had never bent a dragon to his will, and the Cloud Serpent he had with him was already proving to be a handful. The two would arrive at the Aberdeen, but Koak was shocked to find no fortresses or citadels, no steel or iron, just a humble cottage and an airy gazebo, both hewn in simple wood and stone.
This can't be the right place.
But as he led the hatchling around the corner of the cottage, he was greeted with an assortment of Cloud Serpents, in both size and color. Koak stood there confused. Where were the warriors he had heard about? Suddenly, Koak was greeted by an elderly Pandaran woman emerging from the gazebo, as well as several other Pandaran who grew curious at both his state and the young serpent, who hid behind him in fear. Shaking off the fog of bewilderment, Koak spoke while the others fawned over his young serpent.
He's yours. And I am not all right. I am injured, and I require transport to the nearest Horde outpost. If you could provide it, I would be in your debt.
The elder went on to explain to him that the serpent had grown attached to him, and that he had hatched it. So he must be the one to raise it. Koak watched and observed those around him and was filled with utter disappointment. There were no warriors here. All he saw was a nursery, and he would have no part in it. Koak turned to leave, but suddenly a deep pain jolted through his leg. He fell on one knee and cursed his injuries, and then suddenly felt something tugging at his wrist. Learning that it had been the young serpent that he had hatched, it too wanted him to stay. Once again, Koak turned to the riders in the skies, this time seeing two of them race against each other, performing death-defying maneuvers with casual ease. The Order of the Cloud Serpent may not have been the fighters he had expected, but they could fly, at least. No longer did Koak see the serpent as a burden, but instead an opportunity. At last, he would become a true Dragonmaw Orc and would train his own war mounts to ride into battle. Let the others here prepare their serpents for peace and playtime. He would prepare his for war. The first week of training did not proceed as Koak had hoped. His serpent proved to be namely stubborn and playful and refused to listen to him even when his head had turned red when he commanded it, much to both the amusement and concern of the Pandaren onlookers. On the 8th day within the order, Elder Anli would speak with Koak while on a walk, as his own serpent would spend its day in the care of another. Their walk would take them to the Windspire Bridge. There, Elder Anli would question why Koak had not named his serpent yet. Koak responded by saying that his serpent hadn't earned it, as that was the way of the Dragonmaw.
We are not the Dragonmaw, and their ways are not ours.
I will do this the Dragonmaw way, or not at all. There are no other options.
This seems to be quite important to you.
When the Alliance took me prisoner, I was separated from my clan. I had the chance to be reunited with them after the Cataclysm, but I did not.
And why not?
I don't expect you to understand. But I dishonored myself and the Dragonmaw by being placed in chains. How could I possibly face them without first proving myself worthy?
Koak turned away from the Elder in the direction of the Eastern Kingdoms.
I am Dragonmaw in name, but not in action. By taming my serpent our way, I can change that, and I can once again be with my people.
The Elder went on to explain the story of the Order of the Cloud Serpent through the story of Zhang, a young girl from Dawn's Blossom who had come across an injured hatchling named Lo, and she would nurse him back to health. Back then, the Pandaren believed her actions would have consequences, that no lone Pandaren could tame such monsters, but they would be proven wrong when the Zandalari invaded. This would be known as the Zandalari Troll Wars. Once the Mogu and the Zandalari were allies, two empires that were shaping the globe in their own image. However, Lei Shen the Thunder King was deceased now, and the two empires never truly recovered since his death. But the Thunder King, though, had promised the Zandalari land, and the Zandalari intended to take it by any means necessary from the Pandaren. Together, Zhang and Lo struck down both the Bat Riders and dinosaurs from the skies, and even from the ground. Thus, the tide began to shift in the Pandaren's favor. Afterwards, Zhang would train other Serpent Riders to aid in bringing down the Zandalari Empire, and drove them successfully from their land. Zhang would find the Order of the Cloud Serpent thereafter. Koak scoffed at this tale and believed that the serpents could not be changed, no more than you can change the nature of war. But Elder Anli would respond to his doubts, stating that it was not a question of change, but of choice. They are indeed wild by nature, and if mistreated, they may grow to be that way as adults. But cloud serpents aren't bound by their nature. Zhang didn't force Lo to fight against the Zandalari and their armies. Lo chose to fight because Zhang trusted him and treated him with compassion. For a moment, Koak considered her words. Could a rider put trust in a beast they rode? Could he truly put his life in the claws of his serpent? To him, it sounded like madness.
An interesting sentiment, but I will say that chains are more effective than choices.
Is that so?
Suddenly, Elder Anli stepped backward and plunged right off the edge from the spire. Koak belled a no and sprung forward to try and save her, but he was too late, and she was gone. All he heard now was the laughter on the wind, but she wasn't laughing when she jumped downward, confusing Koak. Elder Anli was alive though, and appeared atop her onyx cloud serpent. Koak questioned her sanity. What if her serpent had allowed her to fall?
Do you know the difference between steel and iron?
Steel is stronger. Any competent warrior knows that.
so it is.
And with that, the elder atop her serpent left Koak to his thoughts. After this, Koak went on to begin his own form of training with the Order. Koak had agreed to train under the ways of the Order of the Cloud Serpent, and he would find himself playing with a leather ball rather than the training he was hoping for, viewing this form of training as nothing more than a children's game. He was partnered with Ace Longpaw as his tutor, who, unlike the other disciples within the Order, who had good sportsmanship and humility, Ace was far more boastful and covered head to toe in jewelry and fine silken wares. Koak found this rather obnoxious, particularly because the Order seemed to think that they were alike. Begrudgingly over time, Koak would throw this ball to his hatchling, as directed by his so-called tutor. Ace claimed it would help them read each other's moves and instill a vital give-and-take relationship. Koak, still believing in the ways of the Dragonmaw, believed this to be foolish, and that there should be a master and a servant. There was no room for give and take. Ace left the two alone to their practice, and over time, Koak would indeed get into it, as the two would throw the ball to one another. Koak learned that despite the creature's size, it still had enough strength to knock him right off his feet with this lone ball. In time, Koak and the hatchling grew tired, and their ferocity gave way to fatigue as they played their game. Once the moon had risen, they were simply just tossing and catching each other's throws. But Koak would at last have them stop their game for food. As he went on to collect the ball that started their little feud, the hatchling aided in bringing the bag over to him, an act that Koak was both surprised and thankful for. Afterwards, the exhausted hatchling would wrap itself around Koak's arms and drifted to sleep. Koak watched it for a short while before returning back to the Order. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Koak lost track of how long he had been within the Order. But by this time, the serpent was 10 times the size it was when it had hatched now. No longer was it a small hatchling that it had once rested on his arm. Just as the hatchling had grown and matured, Koak's own body had healed, and he had grown accustomed to the life within the Aberdeen. But he grew restless, all the same. While he had remained here, the war in Pandaria had drawn on. Word had reached him how the Horde had rooted itself within Cressring Wilds, how the agents of Hellscream plundered it for buried relics of power that were lost within the continent, going as far to find these long-coveted relics by digging into the very heart of Pandaria within the sacred veil of eternal blossoms. He had also heard how Vol'jin and his dark spears had risen up in open rebellion against their war chief, and how the Horde was splintering apart to choose a side. Koak knew where the Dragonmaw clan would stand. The Dragonmaw were just as intolerant of insubordination as he was. They would fly for Hellscream, and there was no better chance for Koak to prove his strength to them. He would wait no longer, as it was time to fly and fight, even if it meant to fight the very orcs who had watched over him in the internment camps.
I'm not sure this is a good idea. If you ask me, neither you nor your serpent is ready.
By now, a true Dragonmaw Orc would be racing his fellow riders across the sky.
Oh, I didn't know the Dragonmaw liked to race. Tell you what, you manage to ride your serpent, and I'll owe you a match.
Deal.
Koak admitted for all his bluster and bravado, Ace was occasionally good company. The orc trekked up the hill with small occasional pain in his leg, reigniting. Koak found his serpent resting in the shade of a tree, while several onlookers watched the orc. Ace, feigning innocence, claiming he may have told a few that Koak would be trying to saddle his serpent today. Koak chose to ignore the onlookers. Surely this would be short and uneventful. He approached his now grown serpent with saddle in hand, his serpent eyeing at it with suspicion. His serpent had grown in every other way, but its eyes remained the same. Try as he might, the serpent would dodge his attempts to saddle him. Koak would grow angry at this. The Pandaren who observed him whispered and giggled at the expense of his pride.
No more games! This is what we've been training for!
Again, Koak tried to settle the serpent, reaching out to hold the beast still. It whined loudly and moved away, pulling the orc off balance. Koak redoubled his efforts, but the serpent was having none of it, and threw its tail into the tree, nearly uprooting it. Koak fought to regain control, but his serpent was limber and strong. The crowd gasped as the situation began to escalate.
Koak, maybe you should take it easy.
But Koak and the serpent continued to wrestle, smashing each other against the tree, stumbling into the stands. The onlookers quickly evacuated, retreating into the far reaches of the hill. Koak was then flung violently from his serpent's back, right into the checkered banner of the finish line. The pole came crashing down, but Koak's mind was on his recently healed leg, which had been under him when he had fallen. Pain shot through the orc, as did anger. How dare the creature defy him? After all he had done, after all the training and capitulation. He grabbed a fallen rope and brought it to bear, swinging it overhead with a snap and cracking it like a whip, inches from the serpent's face.
Obey me!
The serpent cowered before him, shocked by the act of violence.
Good. Learn to fear me. Learn your place. Learn to obey!
Koak beat the air with a length of rope again, and the serpent shrank away from him as he approached. Koak was livid. Koak began to tighten the saddle onto the serpent despite the beast's protests and struggles.
You will obey now, Koak!
Koak again lashed out with a whip, this time making contact with the beast's scales. It shrieked out in pain, its anguished cries echoing across the Aberdeen.
It will hate me.
Koak pushed the thought aside. Of course the serpent would hate him. That was only natural, and Koak didn't care. It would hate him as dragons hated the Dragonmaw, and as he had grown to hate Hellscream. Koak grabbed at the serpent's horns and yanked its head around, prepared to meet its hatred head-on, deflect it with hardened heart. But when he looked into its eyes, Koak did not see hatred. He saw betrayal and confusion and sorrow so deep that Koak could drown in it. He saw not a terrible monster to be tamed, but a frightened and orphaned hatchling that had cried itself hoarse on the night its mother had sacrificed her life to save it. He thought he saw tears in its eyes until he realized they were his own. The rope slipped from between his fingers as his rage died in his throat. By the ancestors. What had he done?
I did not. That was not.
The serpent cut him off with a terrible roar that shook Koak to his core. It drew in a deep breath, its chest and throat expanding, and then let out a full fury of a storm. Koak ducked out as the lightning only singed at parts of his hair, which stood on end. The serpent then spiraled up into the air and looked down upon him. Koak didn't know what to think or say. The serpent then turned away and sulked out across the sea. Koak rose up shakingly to his feet. The crowd that stayed that had seen it all. His shame was sudden and complete, and his anger did its best to eclipse it.
What did you expect? I am a Dragonmaw Orc. This is our way. This is who I am.
Anli stood quietly among the spectators, those bright eyes now filled with sadness. The Pandaren left him then. Not a word was spoken. Ace hung back for a moment, but Anli placed a paw on his shoulder and shook her head. Then they too were gone. Koak turned toward the sea in the direction of which the serpent had fled. His serpent was going home. Night had fallen in the hours after the serpent had left him. The orc fought to control his body as rain befell him. He had not paid much mind to the elements until now, and wondered if they had chose now to punish him for his insolence. Koak took his old crutch in hand and trudged across the muddy beach until he finally found the place he had found the egg. The nest remained shattered and broken, and there laid his serpent, coiled at the nest's center. It hissed as Koak approached it, and it retreated to the rear of the nest. The sight broke Koak's heart and filled him with renewed shame.
Wait! I have not come to harm you.
The serpent wailed at him and rose into the air. It swooped past him, landing on an outcropping high above, and continued to watch him with obvious suspicion.
Even now, even when I come to you, my pride discarded, to plead for your forgiveness, even now you resist. Why must you always be so willful? You answer every command with defiance, simply because you can. Even now, when I've braved this wretched storm in search of you, a true Dragonmaw Orc would not tolerate this. A true Dragonmaw. A true Dragonmaw.
Koak took a deep breath and exhaled until his lungs burned for aid. He looked to the skies and into the falling rain. He was crying now, and he wanted to believe the spirits were weeping with him.
As if I knew anything about that. I am no Dragonmaw Orc. And I never will be. I grew up in an internment camp. But I was born in Grimbatol. My father used to tell me that I would one day ride the back of a great dragon. That the Dragonmaw would rule the skies, and the rest of the world would soon follow. That was before those same dragons rose up and burned the clan alive. We lost control, and we were too weak to regain it. The humans found me afterward and placed me in chains because I lacked the strength to escape with the rest of my clan. My slavery did not end until Thrall brought the camp's walls crashing down, just as the rest of the Red Dragonflight had done to the Dragonmaw. That is the way of the world, you see. With strength comes freedom. With weakness comes servitude. Now the Dragonmaw belong to Hellscream. They depend on him for vital resources and military support. To defy him is to be destroyed. You cannot see the chains. They are there nonetheless. Until they too are broken. We are Hellscreams to command. And after all these years, I am still searching for one thing. The strength to regain control.
It came to rest now at his side, protecting him against the elements. The two sat there quietly together until the serpent fell off into peaceful slumber, resting like it did when it was just a hatchling after they had played with the leather ball all those months ago. Koak wrapped his arms around the serpent until he too finally fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came, and with it the elder Anli stood there, waiting for him to wake from his slumber, knowing where to find both of them, as the more headstrong serpents who prized themselves on independence and solitude roosted themselves in the lone spires surrounding the island. Elder Anli noted that his serpent took after its rider, to which Koak believed it was rather clear he wasn't the rider anymore after yesterday's development.
So why pursue it all this way?
Hellscream abandoned me on this island. I will not do the same to my serpent.
You seem to dislike this Hellscream fellow.
The Horde is his army, but we are not his people. Garrosh demands loyalty, but to him that means dying at his command. He doesn't know what loyalty is. Thrall-inspired loyalty. What Garrosh wants is obedience.
The two are not always the same.
No, I suppose they are not.
The two walked in silence until they both reached the summit of the spire. Elder Anli went on to talk about Koak's own journey, and how he had once believed the ways of the Order were false, when he had witnessed what the Order was. Anli then went on to bring up the question she had asked him all those months ago, on what was stronger, steel or iron.
You balk at the act of caring, Koak, but the strongest steel is forged through love. A smith folds it with the utmost care, hundreds upon hundreds of times. Such is the order of the Cloud Serpent. We are the smiths, and the serpents our steel. But with iron, a smith heats and hammers the metal, forcing it into the shape he or she wants it to be. When it cools, it becomes blackened and brittle, and though it may seem strong for a time, it will break when you need it the most. Do you understand, Koak?
I do understand. But what happens when a smith makes a mistake?
Then he must correct it while the metal is still hot. You told me once that chains are more effective than choices. Well, you've tried putting your serpent in chains. Perhaps it's time you tried giving it a choice.
Once more, Elder Anli left Koak to consider, as she flew off atop her serpent, wondering if he could ever do the same as she did. Koak was left alone with his serpent now. The Elder wanted Koak to give his serpent a choice. Then he would give it a choice. Koak addressed the serpent just as he always had. It occurred to him now that it had been nameless. His serpent met his eyes and saw what he was about to do, and had little time to protest. Koak stepped off to the edge of the spire and into oblivion. The nightmare that he had all his life now was becoming a reality. As the ground was becoming to catch up with him as he fell, he believed his serpent would not save him. And this was how he would die. But just as he was about to accept his fate, a familiar screech called out to him and made the dive to save his life. His serpent made its choice. The serpent swooped below him and caught him. His serpent had not allowed him to fall, and Koak thanked him for it. The two now flied within the air and within the clouds, even without reins or a saddle. Koak remained atop his serpent.
Steel. Your name is Steel.
Steel roared in hearty approval of its new name. As the two flew high above the clouds, they witnessed the Order of the Cloud Serpent members waving at them with smiles on their faces.
You owe me a race, Koak.
And you'll get it! But first there is something I must do.
The Order of the Cloud Serpent taught Koak a valuable lesson. True loyalty can never be enforced, it can only be earned. He had raised and nurtured his serpent, cared and confided in it, and in return it had saved his life. The Horde had done the same for him. They had taken him in and given him a family when he was orphaned and alone, and now Koak would stand beside them against Hellscream and the Dragonmaw alike. Doing so would forever mark Koak as an outcast from his clan, but the Horde was born of outcasts and rebels. Together, they had built a home for themselves, Orgrimmar, and together they would take it back.
For the Horde!
Koak now remembered the meaning of those words. To fight for the Horde was to meant to fight for one's siblings. To hold strength of one into the strength of many, and create a bond that would never be broken. That was the true strength of the Horde. Strength of steel. And that was the story of Strength and Steel. It's one of my favorite short stories from Pandaria, and honestly, probably from all of Warcraft. I just really love this journey and story of Koak, an orc who went on from being stubborn with his beliefs as a Dragonmaw, went into realizing those beliefs were wrong once he harms the serpent that he had raised. I just wish that they actually added Koak into the game, and that we could see him help out in the rebellion against Garrosh. He's such a compelling and interesting character. I think he'd make a great champion or leader for his clan someday, even if he was banished. And considering the Dragon Isles is a very high possibility and on the horizon maybe, I would simply love if he was a part of that. Would have been very interesting to see him interact with the dragons, especially the Reds, since the Dragonmaw have a heavy history with them, and Koak is one of the few Dragonmaws who is regretful for their past actions. But yeah, definitely a fan favorite for me, and I would love to see him someday in the near future. But what did you all think of this? Would you like to see more stories or lore events covered this way? Let me know down below. Definitely go ahead and give Raphael Ahad's story a read. It's free online and a really good story to read at your own pace. I don't know if I did this justice, but hey. If you guys like this video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe. You can check my other social medias in the description. You can also join me on my Discord where we talk about all sorts of things. And if you like me enough, you can support me on Patreon like these amazing folks here. It helps me a ton to provide you guys with these sorts of videos. But until next time, my friends,